Just in time for the election last Friday, Kamala turned in a catastrophic jobs report. In short, as my colleague E.J. Antoni put it, quote, the U.S. labor market is turning into a temp agency for foreign workers and government bureaucrats. So first the numbers. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, jobs grew last month by 12,000. That was against expectations of 100,000, and note it takes at least 150,000 jobs just to cover population growth. So 12 is down a full 240,000 jobs from last month pre-revision, and it takes unemployed Americans to 7 million. Meanwhile, as always, previous months were revised down by a total of 112,000 jobs. Of course, they do this because media does not report the revisions the way they report the original, apparently fake, numbers. And it suggests that last week's 12,000 is, in fact, deeply negative. Whereas private sector jobs, the only jobs that actually produce anything, fell for the first time since 2020 when the pandemic was in full swing, dropping 28,000 and 46,000 in manufacturing. So how did we get to a 12 gain? Government jobs, which grew like gangbusters, up 40,000 to another record high with no sign of slowing. In fact, government payrolls have risen by over 1 million since Joe Biden and his sidekick took office. Just in the past year, America has lost over 50,000 manufacturing jobs, but we gained nearly 500,000 government workers. It's a Biden-Harris miracle. It's worth noting that government workers are paid nearly twice what regular Americans make, so 109,000 versus 59. And also note, Joe and Kamala dumped nearly $1 trillion into green energy boondoggles in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which should have pumped manufacturing jobs, even if the companies will go bust in a couple years at taxpayer expense. Meanwhile, government spending surged at a 9.7% annual rate going into the election because elections do not buy themselves. And yet, apparently, the collapse of the actual productive economy is even overwhelming those trillions in bulk growth. Zooming out, despite the government jobs, the green handouts, the federal trillions, labor force participation, which is the percent of Americans who are either working or seeking work, fell again, stuck millions below the pre-pandemic trend. Why? Well, I've mentioned in recent videos how native-born Americans are being wholesale replaced by imports. In just the past year, native-born workers have lost 800,000 jobs, entirely replaced by migrants. Finally, job composition. Once again, we lost full-time jobs in droves, replaced by part-time gigs that historically are done to make ends meet. That comes to 1.3 million lost full-time jobs in the past 18 months alone. So you lost your 9-to-5, but you get to drive for DoorDash and Uber, so that's 2 new jobs. It is another Biden-Harris miracle. Now, some of the carnage will be the hurricanes, but the BLS household survey showed an even harder drop in jobs, 370,000, despite assuming 500,000 hurricane-impacted jobs are still working. Also note, Wall Street analysts had expected 100,000 with the hurricanes, yet here we are at 12, all of it government. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. Stocks rallied on the carnage since at this point financial markets are essentially starving dogs looking for a Fed rate cut, and weak jobs numbers lead to Fed rate cuts. As for the elephant in the room, this is a really bad number for Kamala, meaning the mainstream media will do everything they humanly can to pin it on hurricanes. A new episode of the podcast just went up. Check it out at Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you enjoy your podcasts. So Kay will be watching. See you next time.